Hi, I'm Amber. This story began a long time ago, but I'm going to tell you right now about the turning point in it, which still affects the lives of a lot of people. Well, let me just start from the very beginning. My dad has managed to experience a lifelong lasting friendship. He and his best friend, Mr. Bridges, lived on the same street when they were little boys. Then they went to the same school and then to the same college to study law. As a matter of fact, they practically shared their first job, and it was the first time in the company's history when two competing applicants were both offered employment. There was nothing surprising about the fact that both of their weddings happened the same year and that both families had their children within 6 months of each other. Of course, since Ben and I grew up together, it's no wonder that we happened to fall in love with each other as soon as we turned 16. Everything was totally perfect, and our dads were on top of the world any time they'd start dreaming about their common grandchildren and everything. I'd been dating Ben for more than a year when, as usual, we decided to drop into his house for dinner. But when we opened the front door, we heard his parents arguing really loudly in the kitchen. Neither of them seemed to hear the door opening and closing, because his dad was yelling pretty loudly and his mom was trying to calm him down by trying to shout above him. Anyway, even though I was almost a part of the family, I felt like it would be better if I just went home this time. Imagine my surprise when I got home and witnessed exactly the same situation with my parents screaming and shouting at each other upstairs. So I went to my room, but even before I got there, I came across my dad on the stairs. He looked really mad and asked me where I'd been. I tried to tell him about the fight I'd heard at Ben's place, but strangely, it seemed to me that just mentioning Ben's family drove my dad to a new level of angry. He just refused to listen to me and went downstairs, mumbling curse words or something about his best friend. This was really odd, so I decided to tell Ben about it. It turned out that he had managed to figure out that our dads had just had a really big fight between each other. It was somehow connected to a promotion where they worked. Both of them were applying to it behind each other's backs. How do you like that? And as fate would have it, my dad had gotten promoted. And then Ben's dad figured out what happened and accused him of betrayal. And, well, you know the rest of the story. The next day, Ben was supposed to come and get me because we had planned to go to the beach. But he texted me that he wasn't really feeling good enough for sunbathing. So I decided to go see him to, make sure there was nothing serious going on. I wanted to take my dad's car, and usually he didn't mind at all. But this time he wouldn't let me use it. He said that he didn't want his precious car being parked in the driveway of the Bridges house. I tried to be sarcastic somehow and said, "Thank God you don't mind if I'm seen at that house." And then he was like, "Actually, I do mind. Don't go anywhere near them and stay home." Come on! This whole situation with the job and the fight with Ben's father just pissed me off. I mean, why on earth should the whole family now have to participate in this stupid drama? I told Dad what I thought, and he just started yelling again. And I yelled at him back, which was definitely not smart of me because he ended up saying that I was not only grounded from that moment on, but I was also not allowed to see Ben anymore. I furiously went up to my room and locked the door. I was hoping that he wasn't serious, at least about Ben and me, but it turned out I was terribly mistaken. Of course, I rushed to call Ben to tell him everything, and I was crying because the whole situation really upset me. Ben hated to hear me cry. He was ready to beat up anyone who would cause a single tear to run down my face. He tried to calm me down and promised to drive over to my house as soon as he could. I was just staring out my window, as if the closer I looked, the faster Ben would come. But instead of seeing him, about 30 minutes after we talked, I got a text from him. It said that Ben's dad had gotten rushed to the hospital because he had a stroke. I knew I had to be there for him. No matter how hard our dads were fighting, Ben needed me. So I climbed out of my bedroom window and shimmied down the tree nearby. I almost fell out of the tree, by the way. And I took my bike and hurried to the hospital. I didn't know which ward Ben's father was in, but I saw his mom in the hall trying to buy a coffee from the vending machine. So I rushed to her to ask how Mr. Bridges was doing and what had happened. But she wasn't happy to see me. I mean, like, at all. She basically said almost nothing. Like, no hello, no goodbye. And then she literally kicked me out on the street, saying that nobody from her family would be happy to see me right then, and that I'd better stay away from Ben. Everybody around was staring at us, and I felt so offended and embarrassed at the same time that I just started crying again. I tried to call Ben, but there was no service in the hospital, so I had nothing to do but just take my bike and ride it home. I didn't know how to react to everything. I waited the whole day by the phone, hoping that Ben would call me and tell me how his dad was doing. Fortunately, later that evening, he finally called and said his dad was okay. He also told me why he had the stroke. It was a consequence of the fight they got into when Ben tried to leave to go and see me, and Mr. Bridges was against it. You see, just like my dad and I. I also had to tell him what happened between me and his mom in the hospital, and Ben was totally in shock and mad at his mom. But I insisted that he not jump off the deep end. I mean, she was scared for her husband, and to be honest, I could understand her behavior. Ben promised to keep calm and see me in the morning by whatever means possible. And the next morning, we really did manage to see each other in a cafe, and it was there that Ben proposed to me. Well, we had already had a talk about us living together, but that was before the big fight. And since both our dads were now against our relationship, marriage seemed to be the only opportunity to get out from under our parents' influence. Still, we decided to make a final effort to try to make our families bury the hatchet and arranged a table at one of the local restaurants, inviting all of our parents in secret from each other. But I have to say, this did not work. I mean, our dads definitely couldn't fight with each other in public, but the tension between them was unmistakable. We tried to make them start talking, but when they heard that we were going to move to LA to live there together, both of them turned red with anger. Dad said that if I did that, he wouldn't give me any money any longer, and Ben's dad just listened to us carefully and walked away, not saying a word. Here I am now, packing my stuff. I know that my mom's crying in the next room because she also tried to convince my dad to put himself in my shoes, but he wouldn't listen. And Ben and I are getting on a plane to LA tomorrow. I have no idea what my life is going to be like from now on. Oh, yeah. We got married at City Hall about an hour ago.
Hi, my name is Jim. I'm 17 years old, and I will tell you a story about my mother and how she nearly died on a sunny spring day because of my father. Oh yes, strange things do happen. On that day, my mother received a message on Facebook about how her husband had checked into a motel room near the highway, and it seemed that he wasn't alone there. So she left her house and walked through town to get to the motel. It was hard for my mother to walk past our neighbors' houses as they watched her from the windows. Somebody even left their house to take a closer look. And it's no wonder. My mother had literally led an almost hermetically sealed existence, locked away from the world for almost 3 years. For her, each step was almost excruciating, and it didn't help that they were all looking at her with judgment and disgust. Maybe it wasn't true, but this was probably the reason why her heart was beating faster at that moment, which eventually resulted in her heart attack near the motel. Oh, one last thing I haven't shared. My mother weighed more than 500 pounds. A long time ago, our family life was perfectly normal. I wouldn't necessarily say that we were particularly happy, but everything was normal. My mother, father, and my 3 younger brothers and sisters lived together in a small house on the outskirts of a little Texas town. The only person who earned money in our family was our father. My mother was a housewife and never worked, and honestly, we could hardly make ends meet with our father's salary. He didn't have a profession that was in high demand, and the unemployment rate in our town was high. So our family was pretty poor. But still, I don't remember that I was really in need of anything in my childhood. It wasn't until the age of 12 that I understood what real poverty meant. My youngest brother was less than 6 months old when our father dumped our family. I don't remember exactly how it happened. You know, sometimes our brains just black out some of the awful episodes in our minds. I think that's what happened in this case. All I remember now is that it was late at night when my father packed his things and left in his old car, leaving the garage open. And in the morning, Mother found a note there. It said that he couldn't live with us anymore, that this life was eating him up and he could not stand this endless family routine that didn't bring him any happiness. That was why he was leaving us in order to move to South America, while it was not too late, at least for him. Father didn't leave us any contact information, so we never found out if it was true or not. He didn't even tell us the name of the country he was going to. My mother was broken, and the news had nearly killed her, for 2 reasons. First, after her husband just up and left, she was all alone, with 4 kids, with no work, with no money, and even without a car. Second, everyone in our town immediately found out about my father's disappearance in detail, including the contents of the note he left. Well, you have to understand, when people know each other for so many years, it's hard to keep this news a secret. News would spread immediately, even when our parents were little. And now that every house has the internet, it's even worse. My mother was ashamed to have been dumped, and she really felt humiliated. Well, from that day on, I suddenly had to grow up. I was the oldest man in the family. Now I had to take responsibility. Of course, I couldn't take on a lot when I was 12 years old. So for some time, our family barely existed on government assistance. But as soon as I could start working officially, I got a job at the nearest car wash, where I've worked until now. Work was not too hard, and the owner of the car wash was nice to me, but I didn't have any free time. I was always busy, at school, at work, or at home, where I had to share all the housework with my sister, cleaning, cooking, and looking after the younger ones. You might ask why I had to share all this with my sister. The thing is that my mom just completely stopped being herself and wasn't able to take care of us. For several years after my father left us, my mom tried to hang in there, but she couldn't fight her depression any longer. She became very sad. She even had problems going out to eat because she thought that everyone in town would look at her, some with pity, some with mockery. Both were unbearable for her. So she spent most of her life on the sofa, watching TV or surfing the internet with our old, barely working laptop. And also, my mother ate very, very much. The cheap junk food that she could afford gave my mother enough courage to survive yet another day. It was very sad. And then she started to rapidly gain weight, up to the point that she had difficulty moving around the house. Honestly, it was disgusting. I was glad that she didn't leave home anymore, so nobody would see her like this. So when my mother received a message from her neighbor who saw my father near a motel with a girl, she couldn't just ignore it. It was beyond her control. If she still wanted anything in this world, it was to look into the eyes of the man who ruined her life. So she still left the house. It was only then that she realized how our neighbors perceived her and how much she had changed. Because of her depression, she didn't really have a firm grip on living in reality, and even her poor physical condition didn't help her realize how fat she had become. Now, she began to see it. Somehow she managed to walk to the motel. One of my friends worked there, so he called me and told me to come over ASAP. So I ran there as fast as I could, without even changing out of my work clothes, but I was still too late. She barely got through asking the person working at the motel about my father when she pressed her arm to her chest and fell to the ground. Thank God she lived until the ambulance came, but it still was a heart attack. It's been several months that my mother's been in the hospital. By the way, our neighbor was wrong. That was not our father at the motel. Just a man who barely resembled him, but, everything that happened turned out for the best. All that stress finally shook my mother, and she came out of the spell of depression she had been under. So now she's ready to be treated for obesity and the depression that caused it. And now she really wants to return to a normal life, so I'm hoping that everything will be fine.